The Miracles of Jesus, Power and Compassion. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're exploring one of the most extraordinary aspects of the life of Jesus Christ, his miracles. These weren't just displays of supernatural power. They were profound demonstrations of compassion, love, and the divine breaking into human existence. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll journey through the gospel accounts, examining the miracles of Jesus and discovering what they reveal about his character, his mission, and his heart for humanity. Whether you're a person of faith, a skeptic, or simply curious about one of history's most influential figures, this exploration will challenge you to think deeply about the intersection of power and compassion, and what it means to truly care for others. So let's begin our journey into the miraculous. Before we dive into specific miracles, we need to understand what miracles meant in the ancient world and what they signified in the ministry of Jesus. In first-century Palestine, miracles weren't entirely uncommon claims. Various rabbis, prophets, and holy men were said to perform signs and wonders. But what set Jesus apart wasn't just the frequency or magnitude of his miracles. It was the purpose behind them and the authority with which he performed them. The Gospel writers use different words for miracles. In Greek, they're called dynames, meaning acts of power. They're also called semia, meaning signs that point to something greater. And they're called terida, meaning wonders that inspire awe. Jesus' miracles were all three: demonstrations of power, signs pointing to divine truth, and wonders that left witnesses amazed. But here's what's crucial to understand. Jesus never performed miracles as magic tricks or entertainment. He refused to do signs on demand just to prove himself. When the Pharisees asked him for a sign, he often declined or rebuked them. The miracles of Jesus always had purpose. They were never arbitrary displays of power. Instead, his miracles served several key functions. First, they authenticated his identity as the Messiah and Son of God. Second, they demonstrated the inbreaking of God's kingdom into a broken world. Third, they revealed God's character as compassionate and concerned with human suffering. And fourth, they served as teaching moments about faith, grace, and the nature of God's love. With this framework in mind, let's explore the categories of miracles Jesus performed and what they tell us about power wielded with compassion. The largest category of Jesus' miracles involves healing. The Gospels record approximately 23 specific healing miracles, and they repeatedly mention that Jesus healed many more whose stories aren't individually detailed. Let's start with one of the most moving accounts: the healing of the leper. Leprosy in the ancient world was a devastating diagnosis. It wasn't just a physical disease, it was social death. Lepers were forced to live outside communities, to call out unclean when anyone approached, and were forbidden from physical contact with others. They were utterly isolated, suffering not just from their disease but from crushing loneliness and social rejection. The Gospel of Mark tells us that a leper came to Jesus, knelt before him, and said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Notice the faith in this statement. The leper didn't doubt Jesus' power. He only questioned whether Jesus would choose to help someone like him, someone considered untouchable and unworthy. What happened next was revolutionary. The text says Jesus was moved with compassion. And then Jesus did something shocking. He reached out and touched the man. He touched the untouchable. Before the man was healed, while he was still leprous, Jesus made physical contact with him. In that culture, this was scandalous. It was ritually defiling. But Jesus didn't care about religious propriety when faced with human suffering. Only after touching the man did Jesus say, "I am willing, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. This miracle reveals something profound about how Jesus wielded power. He could have healed from a distance. He could have spoken a word without physical contact. But he chose to touch, to restore not just physical health but human dignity and connection. The healing was medical, but it was also deeply personal and emotional. This pattern repeats throughout Jesus' healing ministry. When he healed Peter's mother-in-law of a fever, he took her by the hand. When he healed blind Bartimaeus, he stopped and gave him personal attention despite the crowd's attempts to silence him. When he healed the woman with the bleeding disorder, he called her daughter and commended her faith publicly, restoring her to community after 12 years of isolation. Consider the healing of the paralytic whose friends lowered him through a roof to get to Jesus. The text tells us that when Jesus saw their faith, he first said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." The religious leaders were scandalized, saying only God could forgive sins. Jesus' response was to heal the man's paralysis, demonstrating that he had authority both to forgive sins and to restore physical health. He addressed both spiritual and physical needs. Or take the healing of the man born blind, recorded in John's Gospel. The disciples asked whose sin caused his blindness, his own or his parents'. This was the prevailing theological assumption: suffering must be punishment for sin. Jesus rejected this entirely, saying the man's blindness existed so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Then Jesus made mud with his saliva, put it on the man's eyes, and told him to wash in the pool of Siloam. When he did, he could see for the first time in his life. What followed was a profound investigation by the religious authorities who couldn't accept that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. The formerly blind man became a bold witness, ultimately worshiping Jesus as Lord. His physical healing led to spiritual sight as well. These healing miracles revealed Jesus' compassion for individual suffering and his willingness to break social and religious conventions to bring restoration. Power in his hands was never about control or domination. It was about healing, restoration, and the recovery of human dignity. Jesus didn't just heal people. He also demonstrated authority over the natural world in ways that left his disciples awestruck and terrified. One of the most famous incidents occurred when Jesus and his disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee in a boat. Jesus fell asleep in the stern, exhausted from teaching. Suddenly, a fierce storm arose, what the Gospel of Mark calls a great windstorm, with waves breaking over the boat until it was nearly swamped. The disciples, many of whom were experienced fishermen who knew this lake intimately, were terrified. They woke Jesus with desperate words. "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing?" Notice the accusation in that question. In their panic, they questioned not Jesus' power but his compassion. They wondered if he cared. Jesus stood up and spoke to the wind and waves, "Peace, be still." And immediately the wind ceased and there was a great calm. Then he turned to his disciples and asked them a penetrating question. "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" The disciples' response is fascinating. The text says they were filled with great fear and asked each other, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They were more afraid after the miracle than during the storm. Why? Because they suddenly realized they were in the presence of someone who possessed divine authority. Only God in Jewish theology had power over the chaotic seas. This miracle wasn't just about Jesus showing off his power. It was about revealing his identity and teaching his followers about faith in the midst of life's storms. It demonstrated that the one who seemed to be sleeping, who seemed not to care, was actually in complete control even in apparent crisis. Another dramatic demonstration of power over nature was the feeding of the 5,000, the only miracle besides the resurrection recorded in all four Gospels. A massive crowd had followed Jesus to a remote place. As evening approached, the disciples wanted to send them away to find food. Jesus said, "You give them something to eat." All they could find was 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, a boy's small lunch. Jesus took this meager provision, gave thanks, and began distributing it. Somehow, miraculously, there was enough for everyone. 5,000 men were fed, plus women and children, meaning likely 10 to 15,000 people total. And afterward they collected 12 baskets of leftovers, more than what they started with. This miracle echoed God's provision of manna in the wilderness during the Exodus. It demonstrated Jesus as the new Moses, the provider of bread from heaven. Later, Jesus would call himself the bread of life, making the spiritual significance explicit. Physical bread satisfies temporarily. Jesus satisfies the deepest hungers of the human soul eternally. These nature miracles show us that the compassionate healer was also the cosmic creator. The hands that touched lepers and took children in his arms were the same hands that commanded storms and multiplied loaves. Power and gentleness coexisted perfectly in Jesus. He could calm a storm with a word and feed thousands from a child's lunch, yet he would never use that power to save himself from the cross. Some of Jesus's most dramatic miracles involved confrontations with evil spiritual forces. The Gospels record numerous instances of Jesus casting out demons, bringing freedom to people who were oppressed and tormented. One particularly vivid account involves a man known as the Gerasene demoniac. This man lived among the tombs in a region east of the Sea of Galilee. He was so violent and strong that no one could bind him, not even with chains. He would cry out day and night and cut himself with stones. It's a heartbreaking picture of someone utterly possessed and destroyed by evil. When Jesus stepped out of the boat, this man ran to him and fell before him. The demon speaking through him cried out, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." Notice they recognized Jesus' identity even when many humans did not. Jesus asked the demon's name, and it replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." A Roman legion contained about 6,000 soldiers. This indicates the magnitude of this man's oppression. The demons begged Jesus not to send them out of the region, but to let them enter a nearby herd of pigs. Jesus gave permission, and about 2,000 pigs rushed down a steep bank into the sea and drowned. When the townspeople came to see what had happened, they found the formerly demon-possessed man sitting calmly, dressed and in his right mind. Their response? They were afraid and asked Jesus to leave. They preferred the familiar chaos to the unsettling presence of divine power. But the healed man begged to follow Jesus. Instead, Jesus told him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." The man became an evangelist in the Decapolis, a region of 10 Gentile cities, preparing the way for the gospel to spread beyond Jewish boundaries. This miracle shows Jesus' power over the darkest spiritual forces. But notice again the compassion. Jesus didn't see a monster or a lost cause. He saw a man created in God's image who needed liberation. He crossed a sea, traveled to Gentile territory considered unclean, and confronted a legion of demons, all for one suffering individual. That's the value Jesus placed on a single human soul. Another powerful exorcism involved a boy whom the disciples couldn't help. The child's father brought him to Jesus, describing how a spirit would seize the boy and throw him into fire and water, trying to destroy him. The disciples had tried to cast out the demon and failed. Jesus expressed frustration at the lack of faith around him, but then turned his attention to the suffering father and son. When the demon saw Jesus, it threw the boy into a convulsion. The father cried out, "If you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus responded, "If I can, all things are possible for one who believes." The father's reply is one of the most honest prayers in Scripture. "I believe, help my unbelief." He had faith, but it was mixed with doubt and desperation. Jesus didn't reject him for imperfect faith. Instead, he commanded the demon to leave and never return. The boy appeared dead, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up. Later, when the disciples asked why they couldn't cast out the demon, Jesus told them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." The point wasn't that they needed a special technique or formula. It was that they needed deeper dependence on God, more intimate connection with divine power. These spiritual warfare miracles demonstrate that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil and to liberate captives. His power extended not just to physical disease and natural forces, but to spiritual oppression and demonic bondage. Wherever there was suffering, wherever humans were held captive, Jesus brought freedom and restoration. The ultimate demonstrations of Jesus' power were his three recorded instances of raising the dead, culminating in his own resurrection, which we'll discuss shortly. The first was the raising of Jairus' daughter. Jairus was a synagogue leader who came to Jesus in desperation, falling at his feet and begging him to come heal his 12-year-old daughter who was dying. Jesus agreed and began making his way to Jairus' house. On the way, Jesus was delayed by the healing of the woman with the bleeding disorder. During this delay, messengers came to Jairus with devastating news. "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Imagine Jairus' emotions. So close to help, and now it seemed too late. But Jesus told him, "Do not fear, only believe." When they arrived at the house, professional mourners were already wailing. Jesus said the girl was not dead but sleeping. They laughed at him, knowing she was truly dead. Jesus sent everyone out except the parents and 3 disciples, then took the girl's hand and said, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately, she got up and began walking. Jesus told them to give her something to eat, a tender detail showing his concern for her physical needs even in the midst of the miraculous. He also told them not to tell anyone, though news of such an event would be impossible to contain. The second raising of the dead was more public and even more dramatic, the raising of a widow's son at Nain. Jesus encountered a funeral procession as he entered the town. A widow was burying her only son, which meant she had now lost both husband and son. In that culture, this was economic as well as emotional devastation. She had no one to provide for her. When Jesus saw her, the gospel says he had compassion on her. Notice that she didn't ask him for anything. He initiated the miracle out of pure compassion for her grief. He said, "Do not weep," then touched the funeral bier, stopping the procession. He spoke to the dead man, "Young man, I say to you, arise." The man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. The crowd's response was awe and praise. "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people." They recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a demonstration of divine power and compassion. The third and most dramatic raising before Jesus' own resurrection was that of Lazarus, recorded in John's Gospel. Lazarus was Jesus' close friend, brother of Mary and Martha. When Lazarus became ill, the sisters sent word to Jesus. Surprisingly, Jesus delayed 2 days before going, specifically so that Lazarus would die, he explained, "so that you may believe." By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. Jewish tradition held that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days, so after 4 days, death was considered absolutely certain and irreversible. Martha met Jesus with words of faith mixed with disappointment. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus made one of his most famous declarations, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." "Do you believe this?" Martha confessed. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God." When Jesus came to the tomb and saw Mary weeping and the mourners with her, the text says he was deeply moved and troubled. The shortest verse in the Bible follows, "Jesus wept." Even knowing he was about to raise Lazarus, Jesus wept at the grave. He entered fully into human grief. His power didn't make him cold or detached. He felt the weight of death and loss. Then Jesus commanded them to roll away the stone. Martha protested that there would be a smell after 4 days. But Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God?" They removed the stone, and Jesus prayed aloud, thanking the Father for hearing him, and then called with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus walked out, still wrapped in burial cloths. Jesus told them, "Unbind him and let him go." This miracle was so dramatic that the Jewish authorities decided Jesus had to die. They couldn't deny the miracle, but they feared his influence over the people. These 3 raisings of the dead demonstrated Jesus' authority over humanity's final enemy. They were previews of his own resurrection, and of the general resurrection he promised to all who believe in him. They showed that death itself must obey his voice. All of Jesus' miracles pointed forward to the ultimate demonstration of power and compassion, his own death and resurrection. The crucifixion seemed like the end of everything. The man who healed the sick, calmed storms, cast out demons, and raised the dead was now dying a criminal's death. Where was the power now? Where was the victory? His disciples were scattered, terrified, convinced it was all over. But the cross wasn't defeat. It was the ultimate act of compassionate power. Jesus could have called down legions of angels to rescue him. He could have destroyed his enemies with a word. Instead, he chose to die. He absorbed the full weight of human sin, rebellion, and brokenness into himself. He experienced separation from the Father so we never have to. He entered death voluntarily as an act of love. And then came the resurrection. Early on the third day, women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. They found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. An angel told them, "He is not here. He has risen, just as he said." Over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared to his disciples multiple times. He showed them his wounds, proving he was physically resurrected, not just spiritually present. He ate with them. He taught them. He proved beyond doubt that death could not hold him. The resurrection vindicated everything Jesus claimed about himself. It proved his miracles weren't tricks, but authentic demonstrations of divine power. It validated his teaching. It confirmed his identity as the Son of God, and it guaranteed the future resurrection of all who trust in him. The resurrection was the miracle that changed everything. It transformed the disciples from fearful, scattered followers into bold proclaimers who would face persecution and martyrdom with joy. It launched the Christian movement that would spread throughout the world. It provided the foundation for the hope that sustains billions of believers across 20 centuries. So what do all these miracles tell us? What's the deeper meaning behind these displays of power and compassion? First, they reveal the character of God. Every miracle showed that God cares about human suffering. He's not distant or indifferent. He enters into our pain. He touches the untouchable. He heals the broken. He feeds the hungry. He liberates the oppressed. He raises the dead. The miracles reveal a God whose defining characteristic is compassionate love. Second, they demonstrate the nature of Jesus' kingdom. This isn't a kingdom of political power or military might. It's a kingdom where the last are first, where the sick are healed, where the excluded are welcomed, where death is defeated. The miracles were previews of the world as God intends it to be, glimpses of the new creation that Jesus will bring to completion when he returns. Third, they authenticate Jesus' identity and authority. He wasn't just a good teacher or moral exemplar. He was and is the Son of God, possessing divine authority. His miracles proved his claims about himself and his right to forgive sins, to redefine religious law, to claim equality with God. Fourth, they create opportunities for faith. Jesus often connected miracles with faith, sometimes saying faith made healing possible, sometimes challenging people to greater faith. The miracles weren't designed to force belief, but to invite it, to give reasonable grounds for trusting Jesus. Fifth, they challenge our understanding of power. In a world where power is typically used for self-advancement, domination, and control, Jesus shows us power wielded entirely for others' benefit. He never used his miraculous power for personal gain. He refused to turn stones to bread when he was hungry in the wilderness. He wouldn't cast himself from the temple to impress crowds. He wouldn't save himself from the cross. His power was always directed outward, always in service to others, always motivated by compassion. This is revolutionary. It challenges every human instinct about power. It shows us what divine power truly looks like. It's not about force or coercion. It's about healing and restoration. It's not about impressive displays, but about meeting genuine needs. It's not about self-promotion, but about self-giving love. This leads to a question many people ask. Does Jesus still perform miracles today? Does he still heal, deliver, and transform lives? Christians across the centuries have answered this question differently. Some believe the age of miracles ended with the apostles. Others believe God still works miraculously today. Some emphasize miraculous physical healing, while others focus on spiritual transformation as the primary miracle. Here's what we can say with confidence. The same Jesus who performed miracles 2,000 years ago is alive today. He's not less powerful or less compassionate than he was then. The question isn't whether he can perform miracles, but whether he chooses to in any given situation, according to his purposes. Many Christians can testify to answered prayers, unexpected healings, remarkable provision, and dramatic life changes they attribute to God's miraculous intervention. Medical professionals sometimes witness recoveries they cannot explain. Addiction specialists see transformations that defy scientific explanation. Counselors observe healing of trauma that seems beyond natural therapeutic processes. At the same time, we must honestly acknowledge that many prayers for healing go unanswered in the way we hope. Many faithful believers suffer without relief. Many situations don't resolve miraculously. This creates real tension and painful questions. Perhaps the greatest ongoing miracle is the transformation of human hearts and lives. The New Testament promises that anyone who trusts in Christ becomes a new creation. The old passes away, the new comes. This spiritual regeneration, this resurrection from spiritual death to spiritual life, is as miraculous as any physical healing. It's just less immediately visible. When someone enslaved by addiction finds freedom in Christ, that's miraculous. When someone consumed by hatred learns to love and forgive, that's a miracle. When someone finds hope in the midst of despair, purpose in the midst of meaninglessness, peace in the midst of chaos through faith in Jesus, those are genuine miracles, displays of divine power transforming human lives. The ultimate miracle we look forward to is the final resurrection and the new creation. Jesus promised that all who trust in him will be raised to eternal life, receiving new, imperishable bodies in a renewed heaven and earth, where there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. That future miracle gives us hope to endure present suffering. As we conclude this exploration of Jesus' miracles, let's return to where we began, the intersection of power and compassion. Jesus could have used his miraculous power for any purpose. He could have conquered Rome, establishing a political kingdom. He could have gathered wealth and lived in luxury. He could have performed miracles to gain fame and admiration. He could have used his power to punish his enemies or to reward his friends. He did none of these things. Instead, he used his power exclusively to help others. He healed the sick, freed the oppressed, fed the hungry, and raised the dead. He touched lepers, welcomed children, honored women, and elevated the marginalized. He ultimately gave his life as a ransom for many. This is what sets Jesus apart. Not just that he performed miracles, but how and why he performed them. His miracles were never displays of ego or self-promotion. They were expressions of divine love breaking into a broken world. For those who follow Jesus, this provides a model for how to use whatever power, influence, or resources we have. Power is meant to serve love. Strength is meant to protect the weak. Resources are meant to bless others. Influence is meant to lift up the marginalized. This is the way of Jesus, the pattern he established through his miraculous ministry. For those still exploring whether to trust Jesus, the miracles provide evidence worth considering. They're not just ancient stories. They're historical events attested by multiple witnesses, events that require explanation. The most coherent explanation, the one that makes sense of all the evidence, is that Jesus was who he claimed to be, the divine Son of God, possessing authority over sickness, nature, demons, and death itself. But the miracles also issue an invitation. They show us that Jesus cares about human suffering, that he has power to help, and that he willingly enters into our pain. The question is whether we'll trust him, whether we'll bring our brokenness to him, whether we'll allow him to work in our lives. The same Jesus who healed the leper, calmed the storm, cast out demons, raised Lazarus, and conquered death is alive today. He still has power and he still has compassion. He's still in the business of transformation, of bringing life from death, hope from despair, healing from brokenness. The miracles of Jesus reveal that divine power looks like love in action. They show us a God who doesn't stand at a distance but enters into our suffering, who doesn't ignore our pain but addresses it, who doesn't leave us in bondage but offers freedom. This is the message of the miracles, that God is both powerful and compassionate, that he has both the ability and the desire to help us, that he sees us in our suffering and he cares, and ultimately, that he's done something about it through Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the miracles of Jesus. I hope it's given you a deeper appreciation for the power and compassion revealed in his life and ministry. If this video resonated with you, I'd love for you to take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps this content reach more people who are searching for meaning and truth. And if you're not already subscribed, please click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos where we'll continue exploring the life and teachings of Jesus, biblical stories, and questions of faith. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments below. Which miracle spoke to you most powerfully? Have you experienced God's power or compassion in your own life? Or maybe you have questions about what we discussed today. Share your thoughts, your stories, your questions. This channel is a community and I read every comment. If you found this valuable, please share it with someone who might benefit from it. Send it to a friend who's curious about Jesus. Share it in your small group. Post it on your social media. You never know whose life might be touched by this message of divine power and compassion. And if you want to go deeper, check out the description box below where I've included links to related videos, recommended books, and additional resources on the miracles of Jesus. Finally, if you're watching this and you feel drawn to Jesus, if you want to experience his transforming power and compassion in your own life, I encourage you to talk to him. Prayer doesn't have to be complicated. Just tell him honestly where you are, what you're struggling with, and that you want to know him. He promises that everyone who seeks will find, everyone who knocks will have the door open to them. Until next time, may you know both the power and the compassion of the one who performed these miracles, and may his transforming grace be at work in your life. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.